what is a movie that every time you see it, it sparks joy?
Oh, okay. Strange response, but beaches. So you're probably too young. I saw that face, Leah. You were like, huh? What is that? Beach is a movie about two friends. They're best friends, and then one of them is diagnosed with this health condition. I won't ruin it for you, but it charts the course of a friendship and just the enduring nature of connection with a person who deeply knows and loves you. And so every time I watch it, I'm just reminded of the people in my life who I feel that way about. And then I also think about my mom, which that gives me great joy because that was one of her favorite movies too. So yeah, look it up. You're too young, but yeah, look it up. It's a very good movie.
Okay, because I was like, I don't think
I
beaches.
saw you were like, I've never heard of this.
Beaches? I've never heard of beaches.
Yeah, it's a fabulous movie.
Okay. All right. I'll check it out. I'll see if it holds up. Thank you all for tuning in to another episode of Take a Space Podcast. I am your host, Leah, and today I am joined by Dr. Mekel. We are continuing our conversation on mental health. And Dr. Mekel, if you wouldn't mind, please introduce yourself to the audience.
Hi. First of all, thank you for hosting me, just creating a space for me to join you in your world. I don't take that for granted at all. But I'm Dr. Mekel Harris. On Instagram, people know me by Dr. Mekel, and it's my first name, not my last, but I'm a licensed psychologist and health service provider. For the last decade, I have specialized in grief and loss. And so I provide one on one therapy a few days a week with clients, children, adolescents, and families. I also do a lot of speaking engagements and consulting with organizations all around the country to better understand about grief, about the intersection of trauma and grief, and what we can do from a community perspective to help address grief and loss, something that we don't really do a great job about.
So, how do we define grief?
Yeah. So grief, when we think about grief, a lot of people sort of bring to mind the death of a person physically. And yes, that is part of the grief process. But grief is really a normal and natural response to any type of loss. So including the death of a person or the loss of a relationship, or even the season that we're in, the loss of structure and routines in the midst of COVID-19. So, loss can look many different ways, but essentially, grief and loss is a natural response to losing something.
Okay, then we hear about grief and how traumatic it can be. What is trauma, one, and what are some trauma responses that people may experience?
Okay. So, trauma is, first of all, let me say that it's very subjective, meaning that what may happen if you and I experienced the same experience, right? We might perceive it differently. It's subjective, right? So trauma is a subjective response to something that is overwhelming. And in the field of psychology, we talk about like little t trauma and big T trauma. So a big T trauma would be something like a natural disaster, right? A global pandemic in a lot of ways, right? The sudden and traumatic death of a loved one. And a little t trauma may be, the loss of a relationship. Still traumatic, depending on the person's perception of it, but not on a grand scale that might we might consider a little bit larger. So the reason it's sort of phrased as a trauma is that this situation, this incident overwhelms us, right? And basically our capacity for working through it is challenged. So again, it's a subjective response to an outside force or incident that overwhelms our capacity to handle it. And so that your second question was, what are trauma responses? Trauma responses are very broad and they can manifest in many different ways, from our physical person to our emotional state to our mental state spiritually. So I'll give a couple of examples in each one. Physically, we might notice something that I often see with my practice and clients, which is sleep dysregulation. So, in the face of something overwhelming, think of it almost like our nervous system literally being jarred and rattled. So, you can imagine if our entire nervous system is overwhelmed and out of sync, that's going to make it hard. It's going to impact other systems, including our sleep. Physically, it can also result in physical aches and pains, right? And that's our body's way of sort of working through and trying to realign itself back to some sort of balance. So, physical aches and pains. Emotionally, we may be more irritable, which makes complete sense. Our world's been turned upside down. We've had this sudden impact that we feel is going to overwhelm us. And so we may be a little bit more what I like to call prickly, right? When things are happening around us. We might also just be angry that it's happened in the first place. And so we may be lashing out at people or turning inward to sort of deal with that. Mentally, we might experience challenges concentrating, so have a difficult time focusing on things, or just sort of difficulty with decision making. So, things that might be simple on the surface might take a little bit longer for us to process, and it might take a little bit longer for us to make a decision about things that are in our normal routine. And then spiritually, if you think about this, nobody wakes up and anticipates something sudden and overwhelming to happen, right? We wake up and we think, hey, I'm just going to go to work today. I'm just going to go and pick the kids up, or I'm going to go to the grocery store and just get grocery shopping. And then something sudden and traumatic happens. And so, spiritually, it can cause us to go into kind of an existential crisis. Like, what does this mean in the world? How do I make sense in the world? How in the world could have happened, right? So lots of questions can come up, and those are just a few of the sort of responses that can happen in the face of trauma.
Thank you for explaining that, because
Yeah.
a lot of times we look to social media or even looking it up on Google,
Mhm.
and those of us who use Bing, to find out, like, am
Oh
I
yeah, I forgot about Bing.
right?
Oh my gosh, you took me all the way back. Like I went back to the early 2000s. Okay.
But we try to navigate and figure out, like, okay, I'm just grumpy. Like, I just want to be grumpy. Well, you've been kind of grumpy for the last 2 weeks. Like, what's going on? But I like that it was, because it is a challenge in our capacity to handle life, because we create the capacity to handle our normal,
Mhm.
mundane, even the trivial parts of it. But
Mhm.
then when something happens that kind of rocks our world, like this whole pandemic,
Mhm.
then we're like, well, why? Well, how? And so I want to talk about a little bit, why is this pandemic so hard? Like, typically a lot of people who I surround myself with, strong-minded people,
Mhm.
strong-willed people,
Yep.
good people who can handle anything that life throws at them.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
this pandemic,
Yeah.
this quarantine,
Mhm.
this the state of the world in which we live right now,
Yeah.
it's hard to navigate. Like, why
Mhm.
has this situation made it so hard for so many of us to be able to just get through it?
Yeah, this is such an awesome question, and I definitely want to unpack it on a couple of layers. So I remember exactly where I was the day that I turned the TV on, and the representative for the World Health Organization was seated at this table, and it was a panel of experts from around the world, and he said, what we thought was an isolated situation in China has now sort of progressed, and they deemed it officially a global pandemic, right? So this was on March 26, 2020. Okay. I remember exactly where I was seated and what I was doing. And and there's reasons for that, which we can talk about or not. But I just remember that specific week.
Mhm.
And what happened was, because we'd never experienced something on a global level, right? We've known things that happen around the world, tsunamis, right, and other sort of weather conditions, and bombings. But those have all been sort of isolated pockets. Now, I'm not saying that there are not ripple effects around the world, but this was the first time that the entire world at once was sort of in this similar space. So, kind of back to what I was saying about trauma, nobody woke up on March 26, 2020 and thought, you know what, today's the last day that I may be on this job because I can't go to work tomorrow because no one knows what we're doing. And so it's not safe. It's the first time that school shut down and parents were like, well, who's going to teach the kids? And the school was like, well, you are, and the computers are, right? So all of these sudden hard stops happen all at once. Businesses closed down. And then if you add on top of that, not only are things closing, but we're closing in, right? So there's a huge fear about being around anybody. And so here we are, sort of used to being out in the public, now relegated to the house. And so these four walls are closing in around us. And so I think that in and of itself is taxing to the nervous system, right? It's back to this sudden and overwhelming ability to sort of manage all these moving pieces at once. And then you got to remember too, March 2020, we're kind of in this weird socio-political environment, right? So I don't know.
True.
I know. I don't even want to think about it, Leah, but we were.
Hmm.
We were leading up to an election,
Hmm.
and we know how contentious and ugly and messy that was. That was already discombobulating to our systems in and of itself.
Hmm.
Then in May of 2020, we all know George Floyd, right? So all of these sort of racial, socio-cultural things happening around us, all of those things were like the perfect storm to create a situation where it's like, what in the he double hockey sticks do I do to
Hmm.
navigate this? And we're all experiencing the effects of it. And it'll be interesting to see in the years to come what the real sort of downfall is with all of these things happening right now. We don't really know yet.
So is that why a lot of people treat 2020 like a person? Because I know we kind of did the,
Yeah.
F 2016 and 2020 is trash and all
Hmm.
this. Like, is that why a lot of people have come to try to treat 2020 and even parts of 2021?
Hmm.
Because in 2020 yeah, 2020 is when we lost Kobe. And it was like the ripple effect down
Yep.
through a pandemic. We
Yep.
had so many marches and protests,
Hmm.
misrepresentation from city to city, state to state.
Yep.
We're on different sides of the political sphere.
Yep.
Apparently, it's not a spectrum; it's just two sides, and so yeah, there's just a disconnect between people,
Yep.
and then we're locked inside the house.
Yeah, with no, and to your point about the being in the house, we're wired for social connection. Like we are social creatures,
Hmm.
and to not be able to experience connection in a live fashion, like we can sort of uplift Zoom all we want, but the reality is Zoom will never take the place of sitting in the room with a person,
Absolutely.
experiencing, the warmth of their body, touching them, and actually having a tangible, being in the space. Yeah, when you look at all of that, it makes so much sense that we were just completely thrown for a loop.
Mm.
And then the other thing I wanted to sort of bring up was to your question about why are we sort of saying like F 2020, let's just erase this from the calendar. From a trauma perspective, right? When anything happens to us that is overwhelming to our system,
Hmm.
our mind, body, and spirit work really hard to keep us safe, right? So I'll use another
Mm.
example, sort of an analogy. When someone has experienced, like, let's say, a sexual trauma of sorts, there may be aspects of that trauma
Right.
that the person can't remember or is working hard not to remember. And it makes perfect sense,
Oh.
right? The body and the mind and the spirit almost intuitively know that if we are able to expose ourselves to every aspects of a trauma, it might literally take us out, right? And so we work hard to sort of
Mm.
shield our mind from certain parts of it. So us saying, "Oh my God, I just want to forget about that year," is almost a statement of, I need to protect myself. I need to safeguard myself because
Oh.
if I look too closely at all the realities of this year, I may not survive it, right? So that's sort of why intuitively we do that.
Hmm. because I never, and I don't, and to make sure that it's a holistic view, I never really stopped to think about why we treat certain situations like it's a person, so that we can either protect ourselves, move on, or whatever we need to do to preserve what piece of sanity we have left coming out of that situation.
That's it. It's self-preservation at its core. And honestly, what a beautiful gift, right? So it's almost like in order to process, we do have to sort of name the reality. 2020 existed. There are these things,
Ooh.
but do we need to look at it all? Maybe, depending on the person, maybe
Mm-hmm.
not, right? So it depends again on that person's perception of the trauma, right? Some people for 2020 it was a gift. They were like, I'm introverted, I get to stay in the house. There's no expectation for me to get out the house. I'm good, right? And they
Right, right, right.
perceive it. They didn't perceive it as overwhelming. Whereas for other people, being in the house was very overwhelming and felt like it was going to literally take them out. So again, that subjective nature of it all.
So, how do we help protect, help support those who still are reeling from the effects of such a traumatic experience? Some people, like you said, thrived in 2020. Like
Hmm.
it was their best year ever in
Hmm.
their personal lives. They were able to start a business, they got
Hmm.
promoted, they were able to meet different people, they got to have, new experiences and connections. They got to fulfill some dreams that they had, spend more time with their family,
Yep.
etc. Some people had the best time of their lives, but some of us are connected to people who are still having a hard time with the impacts that they've experienced
Yeah.
in that time frame.
Hmm.
So, how do we, as their support system, help them through this help them through their grief or the loss of their life that they had before 2020?
Yeah, I think that what we've got to do as a culture is really do something that feels counterintuitive, right?
Hmm.
Which is let's not sweep this under the rug. So if we think about our society as a whole,
Hmm.
I don't want to get too political here, but it's true, right? Look at the history of our country, right? We're good at sweeping things under the rug, right?
Yes.
Even though we see the elephant, we smell the elephant, we smell the product of the elephant, it's easy to sweep things under the rug. And so I think that part of what we have to do is challenge that notion that
Hmm.
we can just ignore what's going on. So in the grief and loss arena, one of the most critical aspects of navigating that process is naming the grief, naming the pain, which as a society we don't want to do. It's sort of like 2020
Right.
happened, I'm done with that. We don't need to look back. We don't need to name that. But the truth is, when people are hurting, one of the worst things we can do is not acknowledge the reality of their pain, right? We just pretend like
Mm.
it didn't happen. But as a supporter, it's okay and it's necessary and helpful to say something like, I can see the impact of 2020. Let's talk about it. What was it like for you? I may not be able to fix it, but I am here to listen. And so just creating a space for people to name the reality of their pain is absolutely critical.
Mm. Because growing up in church, you have the name it and claim it.
Mm,
Well, I'm not gonna
I
claim
don't
that
rec
this was
I
a
don't
bad
receive
year.
it.
I'm not
I
gonna
don't receive it.
claim.
Mhm.
Yes, right. No, I rebuke it.
Yep,
So how
yep,
do we? I mean, respecting people's perspectives.
right.
How do I mean? I can't get rid of my headache or find the reason why I have a headache if I don't say that I have a headache. Oh, it's probably because I didn't drink enough water. Have I slept? Like that. Like if I name what the issue is,
Then you can
maybe I
address
can get
it.
to the root of it.
Yeah, you
Right.
can address it. Mhm. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
how do we deal with having that conversation with those who are just like, no, I'm not claiming depression. I'm not claiming that this was a bad year. Yeah, something bad happened, but I'm not claiming that the bad thing that happened was a bad thing. It's
Mhm.
like, well, I clearly
Yeah.
see the impacts. What's
Yeah.
going on?
Yeah. The elephant sitting on the couch. Let's talk about it. So I think what we have to do is, create those opportunities for us to have conversations about it. We
Mm,
can't change other people, right? We have to
right,
we have
right.
to also recognize what's in our control sphere and what's
Hmm.
not controllable. And so if you are coming up against, if anybody watching sort of coming up against this, um, an individual or an entity that's sort of like, I don't want to talk about this, the best
Hmm.
thing you can do is work to safeguard your own well-being, right?
Hmm.
And feel like you don't have to sort of force people to see it from your perspective, but it is your responsibility, and you can control the extent to which you drive your own narrative. So naming
Right.
your own reality, working to address the downfall and sort of the backlash of that reality, so that you
Hmm.
are in the best mental and emotional space.
Because then that can open the opportunity, like there, so many times we've talked about on this podcast before that it's important to advocate for yourself, because when people see you advocating for yourself,
Yep.
I didn't want to bring this up, but this
Hmm.
negatively impacts me such and such way, other people will feel more comfortable. Well,
Yeah.
hey, they didn't look at that person weird, they didn't
Hmm.
say anything bad about that person, like I'm
Hmm.
feeling those things, let
Yeah.
me speak up. And
Hmm.
so when you, like you said, when you take care of yourself, and I'm so churchy. They say, sometimes you're the only Bible that people will never read.
Yeah.
So if you are saying, well, hey, I was negatively impacted by this situation, these are
Hmm.
some of the effects that I'm willing to share in this space,
Hmm.
and this is how I'm kind of working through it, whether it's um forcing yourself to go out to the grocery store more than once every 3 months, or if it's you talking to a therapist, or being involved in church activities, or helping the youth, or whatever it is, you're working through whatever your grief, your pain, your trigger, whatever it is, and other people can see that and they're like, huh, well, maybe I did have a negative impact or two that I can talk about.
Hmm. Well, and I'll say too, so this I don't know why I started thinking about group therapy.
Mm-hmm.
As I've facilitated groups over the years, there's always sort of like three camps, right? There are the people in the group who are coming in, guns blazing. They want you to know everything that they've gone through from childhood all the way up to the present. And it's like blah,
Mm.
verbal vomit, right? They're the people who are sort of, and no judgment for any of these camps. They're the people who are there to sort of receive and then share a nugget as they deem it appropriate and it's timely and so forth. Then there are the people
Mm-hmm.
who I call the wallflowers, right? They're there. If you look at them, you're like, why the heck are they paying for this group therapy just to sit? But they're soaking
Mm.
in. They're soaking in. So sometimes the people who are the wallflowers can look like they are emotionally avoidant. So I
Mm-hmm.
also want to add that just because people aren't outwardly processing the impact of the trauma of COVID-19 in 2020 doesn't mean they're not processing,
Mm-hmm.
right? It may be that they're processing in a different way, or maybe they're working to sort of manage all of these emotional hits that they have experienced, and inwardly they're trying to get
Right.
themselves back to a place where they feel like they're in harmony, but on the outside it may look a little aloof. So there's always different versions that we have to be mindful of, which is why you can't really know how someone's processing something or not. And so
Mm.
you've got to stay in your lane, right? And focus on what it is that you need.
Absolutely. And I wholeheartedly agree. Let's take a step to the side and really address that real quick.
Yeah.
So in so many ways, in so many conversations I've had, people tend to get frustrated with other people because I found therapy, I found Jesus, I found whatever is helping me to get through it, and I live such a better life.
Yeah.
They need to do what I did.
Yeah.
They're not healing like I healed. They're not doing the thing that I told them to do. How
Yes.
come they won't get on the train? I'm telling them. I even bought their ticket. Get on the train. Why aren't they doing that?
Uh-huh.
Why do people think that everybody needs to heal in the same fashion?
So I think part of this is I'll answer this from a spiritual lens and also a psychological lens. I think we are sort of we love ourselves, right?
Right.
And regardless of who we are, some people may argue this, but we are sort of wired in a way that automatically believes that our perspective is right.
Mm,
If you've ever had an argument with someone, you know this to be true, right?
right.
Unless you are really working to listen well and express empathy and compassionate communication, ultimately, at the end of the day, you want the person to see it from your perspective because you're thinking that you're right.
Right.
Psychologically, this is really similar to children. So children from birth until, the first few years of life are very egocentric, right? They
Mm-hmm.
cannot appreciate the world from anybody's perspective. So they're like, "Man, I'm crying. How come the whole world's not coming?" Right?
Right.
Right? And actually, as adults, we tend to revert back into some of this egocentrism.
Mm.
So it makes sense that we want people to view things the same way. Now, I want to share a little story. Actually, recently wrote a blog post about this, and the name of the blog was something like "When our what to do when our grief doesn't match." And I was sharing the
Mm.
story of my mom's death in 2012,
Mm-hmm.
and my brother and I responding in very different ways. Okay. So I was the one who was sort of like, okay with expressing my tears and talking about her at every turn, bringing up memories and so forth. He, on the other hand, was sort of an internalizer. He didn't really want to bring her up at any given moment. And he definitely, I think I've seen my brother cry twice in his 50 years of living. Oops, did I just say his age? Sorry, Stanley. No, that was purposeful, and this is what we do as siblings. We dig, right? So,
I don't know how to respond
oh
to that.
goodness, sorry. So we responded really differently. So for the first 2 years of my mom died, our mom died. My thought was like, he didn't give a damn. Honestly, I was like,
Mm.
why isn't he, talking about her, right? If you love somebody, you want to keep their legacy alive, you want to talk about him, this and that. And it took me therapy, it took me talking to him, and it took me sort of remembering, like, oh, yeah, Mekel, just because you think it doesn't mean that's the only way, which is that egocentric
Right.
part of us. So, to your question about how do we deal with this, I think what we do again is focus on our own individual healing. And then we make allowances for other people. We say, you know what? Stanley's not me. How he processes this is very different. Doesn't make it right or wrong, it makes it
Mm-hmm.
different. And I am wholly, wholly convinced, Leah, that if we can get to a place in society where we're able to say it's not right or wrong, it's different,
Mm-hmm.
what a different society we'd have. We wouldn't have all these political fights. We wouldn't have all of the,
Right.
dilemmas that we face if we simply allowed ourselves to sit in the reality that not everybody is the same, because we're not. We're not. And we're never going to be. And there's almost a beauty in that if we're able to look at it that way.
I really hope that we can get to that point because when I think of like, and I'll say it like, I since Kayla has lived here, I may say, "Hey, I'm recording in at 2:30 in the morning." Right? I'll tell her in the morning that I'm recording 2:30 in the afternoon,
Mhm.
and but I know she has two kids. She has school. She's probably just getting up from work. She has so many things going on. I can't then get mad at 2:15 if she hasn't made space for me to record, like
Mm.
whether it's keeping the house quiet or
Mhm.
or handling the cooking after the fact after I'm recording,
Mhm.
because even though I told her, she's not thinking about me. So instead of me being mad on the back end because she may have forgotten or whatever,
Mhm.
I'll say, "Hey, just want to let you know, 15 minutes, I'm recording." And a lot of times instead of, I try to make that resolve like the first couple of weeks of living here so that it
Mhm.
doesn't turn into an issue.
Mhm.
I know you're not thinking about me 24/7.
Right.
I know you're not trying to figure out how to make my life better 24/7. You
Mhm.
have two small children.
That's right.
So I'm the least of your worries.
Yeah.
So if I'm if my expectation is that whomever I am sharing a space with or
Mhm,
whoever I'm in a relationship with
mhm,
is that I'm always going to be top of mind. And
mhm.
some people think of that way, oh, they should always think of me. And if they're getting food, then they need to think of me, whether or not I've eaten. It's not always that way. That's not how
Well,
their brain may be programmed.
yeah, and they're setting themselves up for massive heartache and failure.
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely. So it's sort of like managing expectations. And I think
Yes.
one of
Yes.
the one of the painful things and one of the gifts of living is that we're presented with so many uncontrollable aspects of our lives,
Hmm.
as well as I was telling someone this earlier. Well, there's two common threads in life, right? We're all going to die. Like that is a fact, regardless of who
Right.
you are. And we're all waiting. We're all
Mm.
waiting, right? We're waiting to have a child. We're waiting to get married. We're waiting in line for the line to progress. We're waiting at the red light. We are waiting for someone to answer the phone. We're waiting to get that news. We're waiting to get a job. We're waiting to quit a job. Waiting is such a universal thing, and
Hmm.
we can recognize the gift in it, right? And it's sometimes it's hard to see these things as gifts. If we
Right.
can say, "Huh, there's all these uncontrollable things. What is it inherent in that that I might be able to glean from, right? What can I glean from
Mhm.
this? Maybe it's that we can be free, right? When we realize we don't have to control, we don't need to be top of mind to everybody, right?
Right.
Maybe we're designed to sort of manage ourselves, and it depending on your faith tradition, yourself in relationship to God, right? So maybe that's really what it's about. So I
Hmm.
think it's just important for us to always be taking that step back and
Right.
evaluating
Right.
what is life trying to show me.
Right. And
And
the lessons are not all the same.
no, they're not. They're unique, which is makes it even more beautiful. It's sort of like, what do I need? And then sort of seeking out that answer. And trust me, if you ask that question, you got to be ready because usually when we ask what do we need, there's some problems that show up. There's some trials
Exactly.
that are on the back end of that. So, yeah.
Yes. I agree. So then the question becomes, how do we handle if we are if we're working on not necessarily policing ourselves, but learning how to manage our
Mhm.
emotions and really managing those expectations
Mhm.
when something traumatic happens on the scale of a global pandemic,
Mhm.
or whether it's a big T or little t. We
Right.
want to be able to manage our capacity to handle those things.
Mhm.
We have people who come in like little Keebler elves and start yelling at us about being positive, only thinking on the positive things. And it's
Mhm.
got to be, joy from inside out, whereas everything's got to be good. We got to stay happy.
Yeah.
Just choose happiness.
Mhm.
Choose happiness at all points in time.
Yeah.
How do we manage those types of conversations and essentially those relationships?
Yeah, so this is born out of what we were sort of describing earlier, our very pain avoidant society, right?
Mm,
We've been trained from day one, right? Like you hurt your elbow, you see a bump, you go to the doctor. This is not to down healthcare because we need you. Thank you, God,
right,
for you.
right.
At the same time, that model sort of sends the message, there's an issue, I go, I patch it, and then I get on with it. There's healing. But
Mhm.
life doesn't work like that. Loss does not work like that. There may be wounds that we can't put a bandage on. There's not a band-aid big enough to sort of cover up the trauma and the stress of
Right.
the pandemic. And so I think part of it is figuring out what we can do to sort of almost be preventive, right? So I'm a huge fan of rest, a
Mhm.
huge fan of rest. And this is new. This is one of the gifts that I received from 2020 was, Mekel, you can't do it, right? Like body's telling me no, mind is saying no, spirit is saying no. Okay, I need to sit down. So, what we can do to help ourselves is rest, right?
Mhm.
Because if we don't, it's very difficult to perceive anything with clarity if our mind is not rested, right?
Absolutely.
We've been gifted with at least 8 hours, right? Where our body definitely needs to sit down. And part of that is that nervous system reset, right? This is
Mm-hmm.
where we heal. So, patients who are in physical health crises, the doctor will say you need to rest, right? This
Mm-hmm.
is where our mind can sort of sharpen. If you've ever studied for a test, one of the best things to do is study and then take a nap. Because why? Information can consolidate, right? This is also where we restore ourselves. And so, rest is a really powerful antidote. It's not
Mm-hmm.
going to take away the stress, but it's going to help us cope with the stress in a much different way. So that's one thing. And then I'll also add that we need to spend some time checking in with ourselves, right? Slowing
Mm.
down the busyness of our lives and
Right.
asking ourselves some critical questions, right?
Right.
Basic level, an acronym that I love, which is HALT, HALT. So, am I hungry? Am I angry about anything in this moment? Am I feeling lonely? Am I feeling tired? Knowing that the more we say yes to, the less likely we're going to be able to manage stress in a healthy and helpful way, right? So,
True.
that's a simple thing. And then just sort of checking in to say, look, have I taken a breath today? Have I sat down and just taken stock of my emotions today? And usually the answer is no. And so
Mm.
the more we can do that, the more we're able to anticipate stress because we know it's coming. There was a pastor one time that I listened to, and he said, "We're either in a storm, we're coming out of a storm, or
Mm-hmm.
we're going into a storm." And that's
Right.
the truth. All of us right now are in one of those three positions. So it's
Mm-hmm.
not a matter of, oh, I'm so shocked that a storm came. No, we can anticipate it's coming. And if
Right.
it's not there yet, wait a little bit longer and it'll be there. But you'll also get on the other side of it too before you get back into it. So,
that that's so true. And I mean I heard that a lot in church coming up, and it's like,
mhm,
oh, in the midst of, in spite of course. And it's like,
yeah,
yeah, we could kind of think on joy,
yeah,
but I'm hurting right now.
yeah,
I'm
yeah. So,
lonely right now. I'm in
yeah.
pain right now.
Absolutely. Yeah. Toxic positivity is sort of like, if people aren't familiar with it, it's a philosophy of if I can solely focus on what I consider good, what I can consider positive or joyful, then I can almost steer my experience in that direction. If
Mm.
only we had that level of control. Now, I do know there's power in our tongues, and our thoughts can drive and impact our emotions and our behaviors. Absolutely. So,
Mm-hmm.
this is not me saying that there's no space for gratitude or positivity. At the same time, we don't live in a world where everything is positive. And so, we have to sort of name the realities of our pain. If not, we are self sabotaging,
Right.
in my estimation. And we're also denying a massive reality of the human experience, which is that there is pain. And so we have to do that. I will say that in the grief and loss space, it can be really hurtful and damaging for someone to sort of apply this toxic positivity approach in the face of loss, right? When we experience a death of any sort, there's no goodness, right, that we're going to be able to immediately latch on to. And that's
Mm.
okay because trauma and grief, how we respond to these things, is natural and it's normal. And I'll add another in, it's necessary, right?
Mm.
Have to sort of move through that. And in the face of those experiences, to apply toxic positivity can really be damaging. And sometimes, and not to sort of shine a light on churches, sometimes in spiritual circles, there can be a tendency towards toxically positive commentary.
Because you hear it all the time at church. Of just, I mean, not just church, but like in funeral homes, where it's like, oh, at least they're in a better place. They would want you to smile. They would want you to be, and it's like, lady, I am in pain right now.
Right.
Please leave me alone.
Yes.
So what are some ways that we can be more compassionate or empathetic to people instead of focus on the good things? God will always provide. I know logically, yes, I know God will provide. I'm
Right.
standing here today.
Right.
Like, I'm
Right.
able to talk to you. We're able to have a wonderful conversation. I know God will provide.
Well,
But
and if we put this in a physical realm, Leah, like if somebody showed up to the ER with a broken arm,
mhm,
we would not say, "Oh, just think positive." No, we're gonna be like, "Where's the doctor? Where's the sedation? Where's the numbing? Where's the brace?" All these
right,
things
right.
to fix the pain. And so I think this is what makes emotional well-being and functioning so challenging because it's invisible. And because we
Mhm,
can't see it, it's hard to concretize the fixing, if you will. What we've
right.
gotta do is eliminate that whole mentality, like, these aren't things that can be fixed. They are things that we can help a person work through. So,
Mhm.
to your question about what can the supporting person do, one of
Yes.
the best things that, we can do, and if we're on that perspective, is listen. Is
Mm,
to zip this and open these, right? Zip this and open these, which is something we do not do well. We do not do well. Part of the pain avoidance. It's like someone's crying and we're like, here's some tissue. And it's like, wait a second, those tears are needed. We need to emotionally release, right?
right, right.
What I'll often tell clients in my room is there's tissue there if you need it. But when they start crying, I never mention it because they know. They know it's
Yeah.
a foot away. And if they want it, they can help themselves. But if they need to allow the tears to flow, they can. So listening can go a long way. And just being present with someone to witness the pain that they're in can be incredibly
Mhm.
profound for the hurting person.
I agree because when you give somebody that space to just exist in the state that they're in,
Hmm.
whether your perception of it is good or bad,
Hmm.
oh, they could be doing so much better if they think this way. They could
Hmm.
be, feeling so much better if they were to just see this thing. Just allowing that person to exist and
Right.
them knowing that you're there if they need you
Yep.
is huge.
It's huge. I cannot tell you how many times over the years, and it kind of tickles me every time, where I've sat with a client and really the greatest therapeutic tool I had in the room was my presence and
Mhm.
just simply acknowledging their humanity. And at the end of the visit, oh, Dr. Harris, what you said. And I'm sitting there going, I didn't even say that. I didn't even say, I'm like, I didn't say that. However, the presence offered them the comforting words that they needed to hear in
Okay.
the spiritual realm and whatever realm that you want to call it. They sensed a comfort and that
Right,
liquid to
right.
their eardrum. They heard something that wasn't said. And so just being there and leaning in can be incredibly effective. The other thing that we can do to help is to ask what the person needs and focus
Mm.
on what they need versus what we think they need, right?
Mm.
Back to egocentrism. Not only do we think it's all about us, but we think we have all the answers. Yeah,
Don't we?
and we absolutely do not. And so,
Huh.
gift to say, Leah, I see that you're hurting.
Mhm.
To the extent that you can, what would be most helpful for you? And let that person drive the need and drive the input and the intervention as opposed to us thinking, okay, they need food if somebody dies. Not to say there's anything wrong with food and buffets and that
Right.
kind of stuff, or they need this, or no, they need what they need. And one of the best people to know what they need is the person, right? So why don't we
Right.
lean into the expert and just trust the fact that each person is an expert over their own experience.
I did have an interesting conversation with someone previously,
Mhm.
and she made the statement which I thought was very interesting, and I want to hear your thoughts.
Okay.
Um, it's okay to ask someone, what is it that you need?
Mhm.
But someone who may be overwhelmed may be like, I have 45 jobs to do, and you want me to give you another one?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
So her way of kind of asking at the same time was, I can sit with you, or I can take you to the store if you need to, like offering what you're capable of doing and
Yeah.
letting them choose from those things. If you want to sit here in silence, I'm here for you.
I
If you
love
want to, if you want to me to make you something to eat, or
that.
if you want to watch a TV show, like let me know, because then that way,
Mhm. Mhm.
if they say, well, I really need some of your time, and you're like, I don't have time today. At least
Right.
you can offer things that you're able to complete, like a task that you're able to complete.
I love that. I think part of the good thing about that is that it offers the person who's overwhelmed a frame within which to think, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I agree, right? So to sort of ask an open-ended, what do you need, could be overwhelming to a certain person, and to someone else that may be freeing that somebody finally asked what they need. At the same
Right.
time, asking that question could be overwhelming. So to have sort of this two-part, I'm able to do this, I'm able to do that, which would be most helpful. And then here's the other thing I often share this in the grief and loss space is
Mm-hmm.
if you're supporting someone walking through a painful season, know who you are in relationship to them. So here's an example.
Hmm.
Um, when my dad died, right, in March 2020, I had people that were my immediate circle. So they knew me from before his death, right? So they didn't really have to ask what I needed because they knew me. Okay, so there was them. Then there were the people that were sort of surrounding them, just in my, work environment, people at church who know me but not intimately, right? So they may have needed to sort of ask versus assuming. Then there
Right.
was sort of like the larger community. So I'll give a really silly example, but this really did happen. I was walking my dog about 3 months after my dad died, and my neighbor who lives next door had shared with some other neighbors that my dad had died. So I'm on this walk with my dog. I'm like 5 streets away, don't even know anybody on the street. Well, there's this man who I always see, and literally we say, "Hey, good morning, good evening. How's your dog?" "He's fine." "Great, your dog is cute. Thank you. That's it." He somehow got the news. So the news had trickled through the neighborhood that my dad had died. And the man proceeded to say, "Oh yeah, well, it's good to see you. I heard about your dad. I'm so sorry. My wife and I are going to come over and make dinner for you." And I was like, "No, you're not. That's not happening."
Whoa.
And I know the sentiment was from the best place. However, he forgot where he was. He forgot who he was when he
Right.
was here, right? So part of supporting someone is knowing who you are in relationship to
Absolutely.
them, knowing that as a neighbor, you may be the one that just sort of waves and smiles, and you have more of a peripheral supportive stance, whereas
Mm-hmm.
the person who knows you intimately, they may not be able to do and have the privilege to do something more intimately because they know you, right?
Right.
So
Right.
that's always important to not forget who you are, because then you're overstepping and doing
Right.
something that could actually be really unhelpful as the person grieves.
That's a good point.
Hmm.
That's a good point, because I'm good for the peripheral people. I'm good for a card. I'll say some
Right.
kind words. I'm good for a card.
Yep.
My
But you're not
more
coming to the house.
Absolutely not. Why am I at your door? I'm
Right.
not going to be there. I'm
Yeah,
because then already when you're going on top of that, now you're adding in all these uncomfortable feelings that are not necessary.
that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so as I sort of thought about him, I'm like, man, can you imagine like this person comes over? Now I've got to basically entertain a stranger on top of,
Right. On
and I'm
top of dealing with,
exhausted.
yeah.
Right. So always remember who you are, and that will help drive perhaps how you respond and show up for the person who's grieving. Right.
Right.
I do believe there's a space at the table for all supporters. So there's something that everybody can do. The question
Absolutely.
is, how intimate is the interaction based upon the relationship?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yes, absolutely. Well, um the last point that we were going to talk about,
Mhm.
and I just wanted to ask just your opinion, because we talk about being broken a lot, especially, oh, I don't do things right, I don't feel good about myself, being in this space of constantly being in a state of grief,
Yeah.
because like Charlie Brown,
Hmm.
right? We constantly think about like people who are similar to Charlie Brown, and they constantly feel like, man, I am a perpetually broken person. Like no matter what I touch, no matter what I do, it always falls apart.
Mhm.
How can the community better support those? So we'll talk about the community first, then we'll talk about a little bit about that person, that
Mhm.
avatar. But how, as a community, can we protect ourselves and our well-being?
Mhm.
Because we keep pouring into someone else who doesn't want it is gonna, have some negative ramifications for us. But how can we properly, or what are some ways that we can properly support that type of person?
Mhm. A person who views themselves as broken.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think one of the strategies, and this is gonna be sort of, just gonna throw it out there, we need to stop saying that as a
Mm,
society. I sit with so many people, like, over the years, just so many people who have heard this narrative, they've drunk the narrative, they've digested it, they are excreting it out of their pores, that they are fundamentally broken. But let's think about this. If you fundamentally believe that, right, where is the hope, right? Now, this is not me saying that life is perfect. We're born into this world a whole vessel, and we never are cracked or have glass shards, around us because of situations that happen. Are there
right,
broken pieces? Absolutely. We
right.
all carry with us broken pieces. At the same time, to fundamentally communicate that a person is broken is extremely problematic. And this is one of those things, I gotta be honest, Leah, this gets under my skin so bad.
Mm,
I hear it in the community. I primarily hear this in spiritual church realms. And
mm,
I get it, but if you sort of look at, not to make this a Bible study or whatever, but if you look at the sort of scriptural, spiritual bases, there's no evidence of that. There's no
mm,
evidence of that. What you see are people who have broken pieces, who are
right,
sort of seeking something outside of themselves to feel more complete. Now that makes sense to me, but nowhere have I ever seen, like, you are broken. As a matter of fact, it's like, no, you are whole. You are healed. You are well, right? So I think we've got to, from a community, stop saying that, so that people can stop drinking it. So
right.
that's what I would tell the society, is to stop saying it. And then to the person, I think a large part of this is reprogramming, right? So we can't
Mm,
control society, but we can control ourselves, right? So some of the things that we can do to safeguard ourselves is, limit exposure to those environments that keep perpetuating that sort of talk. Now, I'm not saying don't go to church. I'm not saying, but if you are in a situation where your community is sort of sprinkling that dust on top of you, you don't have to stand there and be sprinkled upon. You
right,
can shift into a different space and avoid the sprinkles. And so know what's best for you. And if that narrative is causing you to feel defeated, worthless, emotionally distraught, depressed, suicidal, that is not the space for you. That's not
mm,
the space for you. So remember that you are your own agent. Put your cape on yourself, right? And move yourself into a space that is actually sprinkling some things that are more helpful and healthy for you emotionally. Then talk to yourself, right? Get up, and yes, no one's saying ignore the broken pieces, right? Because that's the toxic positivity, like, oh, it doesn't exist. No,
right.
okay to say, you know what, Glass? I do see you. I see the broken pieces. I see where some things have, broken apart here, and where I don't feel, a particular way. At the same time, I am fundamentally whole. What can I do to, help perpetuate my healing, my wholeness, right? My
Mm,
togetherness, my integration, right? What can I do? That feels a hell of a lot more empowering than waking up and saying, "Man, I'm broken."
absolutely.
Right? So positive self-talk, and I know people sort of shy away from that because they're like, "Oh, this is just playing word games." No, it's something about neurologically when words hit our eardrums, right?
Mhm.
There is a shift neurologically, right? So we're actually impacting our neuronal activity by
Hmm.
allowing. That's why it's important to focus on what comes in these ears, right?
Right, right,
Everybody
right.
should be welcome to come in this ear. We've got to protect that. But we've got to also speak to ourselves and allow our eardrums to hear another thing from us within. So,
I really do like that. I like the action of proactively changing the narrative that you've constantly told yourself. Because
yep.
if you are Charlie Brown waiting to impress the little redhead girl, or trying to change who you are from the outside in,
Mhm.
it's going to be difficult. You don't need extra stuff. You didn't come into the world with extra stuff. It's
That's right.
just working on, hey, yes, I know that I can be, this negative thing in this light, but that negative thing actually works better in this space.
Right. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I love this is called like cognitive reframing, right?
Hmm.
So I love what you said. I'm gonna rephrase it, but this is what you just said. Everything that we fundamentally need, every tool, every talent, every gift is already within us.
Right.
And that's something that I share with my clients every single day. I'm like, you're coming to me, but I'm not the solution, right? I'm not the fixer. I'm not the advice giver outer. What I am is a person to help point you to what's already within you. And when you empower people like that, like I sit with people and they're like stunned, like, oh my God, really? Yes, everything you need, you already have. My job is just to help, shake some things up and help things fall back into place, back to really its original state. But you've already had it. What did Glinda the Good Witch say? Everything you need is already within you.
Yes.
On the Wizard of Oz. It's
I
true.
actually just rewatched that like a few days
Oh,
ago. It was
I love it. It's so true. Everything we need is
yes.
within us, and so we've got to
Yes.
be reminded. Here's the danger. Okay, back to this whole idea of I'm broken. Here's the danger in this. If I think I'm broken, guess what? I don't believe I have within me what I need. So then I'm
Right.
constantly externally seeking out validation through people, through
Mm.
activity, through job, right? I'm constantly seeking out things to tell me that I'm fulfilled when those things will never fulfill you. I don't care if you got $1 million in the bank, there's still broken pieces, right? There are
Right.
still broken pieces. And
Right.
so
Right.
we've got to be really, really careful with that narrative.
I wholeheartedly agree. Honestly, I wholeheartedly agree. But
Yep.
thank you so much for this conversation. I hope that the listeners out there have a world shift, a perspective shift,
Yeah.
where they can just get some things, shake some things up, and they're able to perceive their situation or even themselves as, hey, first, I'm human. Let me experience life how I need to experience it. But
Yes.
experiencing a support system that actually supports you. So
Yeah.
whether it's the current one you have or the one that you're trying to build or one that you're moving to, please
Hmm.
get that support system. But
Yep.
thank you so much, Dr. Mekel. I really, really appreciate you coming on the show. This is your time to plug whatever it is that you want to plug.
Woo! Okay, first of all, thank you again. Like I said, I grew up in Texas, and so and both my parents were in the military, right? So one of the things that we used to get in trouble for was you don't just come downstairs or come out of your room and be like, "Hey, what's for breakfast?" You say good morning, right? And then you ask, and then after that, you say thank you. So thank you for opening up your doors. Good morning and inviting me to your table. I, again, do not take that for granted. I think it's always a privilege to come into someone's house and be hosted so doggone well. So thank you. Now, to the plugging, there are a couple little things I want to share. If you are on my primary social media house is Instagram, you'll find me over there doing lots of stuff, doing funny reels, educating, posting carousels and quotes and all kind of stuff. But yeah, head over to Instagram. My Instagram handle is at Dr. Mekel, Drmekel. I've also written a book if you are experiencing this grief journey and all of its ups and downs. There's a wonderful book, I believe, that I can share called "Relaxing into the Pain: My Journey into Grief and Beyond." What it is a course throughout my journey from the day that my mom was first diagnosed with a stage 4 cancer diagnosis all the way to a couple years after her death. So you'll hear all the ups and downs and arounds spiritually, emotionally, and physically in my life and so forth. I also have some courses and a grief anatomy toolkit. If you're walking out that process and need some support, head over to Instagram, click the link in my bio, and you will be exposed to lots of goodies in there. So thank you for allowing me to share that this evening.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Mekel. I truly honored to just even have this conversation, be able to talk so openly and candidly about some things we want to sweep under the rug. So,
Thank you.
we have to address the elephant. That's the way we heal. We address the
Yep.
elephant. But
Yep.
thank you all so much for tuning in to another episode of Take a Space podcast. I have been Leah, joined by Dr. Mekel. Please make sure to go to support her. Go to Amazon to check out her book called Relaxing into the Pain. Make sure that you follow her on social media at Dr. Mekel, and any course that she has. If it's as great as if this conversation is any indication, it's awesome. So check those out. Thank you so much again for tuning in. Please make sure to follow us as well on Take Up Space Podcast. It's Take Up Space POD on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And also check us out on YouTube. That way you'll be able to see the video version of this episode. Thank you so much to everyone who's tuning in. I hope that you have a great one.
Everybody.